Hello everybody, welcome to this video. It is today the 15th of August 2016 and we are here in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I'm sitting here together with Ardian Adžanela. I met him in 2008 via email, and then he came in 2010 to our conference in Istanbul. Ardian and he and his family are, welcoming me in their family now in August 2016 in Sarajevo, which is a great privilege. And it is another privilege that Ardian will now, or has agreed to share something perhaps not so easy, namely his very personal experiences when the siege of Sarajevo began in 1992 when he was 17 years old. Ardian is a researcher with a focus on ethics. So now the siege of Sarajevo ended in 1995 and he has now some distance, and the world now is filled with people, with youth, with adolescents impacted by war and trauma. So it's a great honor that Ardian is willing to share a little bit of his subjective experiences, how it is to grow up in a peaceful city and then suddenly, without notice, almost very suddenly, trauma falls upon them. So thank you, dear Ardian, and please now it's your floor.
Thank you, dear Evelyn. I would like to thank Evelyn. I would like to thank Human Dignity and Humiliation Studies Network, which has had a great positive impact on my personal life, because it is really, really important to know that out there are people who really care, simply put. And human dignity, in essence, is about care. It's opposite of humiliation. Sometimes when I have a trouble explaining what I mean by human dignity and what a lot of people mean by human dignity, I would usually say it's quite opposite of humiliation. It's when you feel good about yourself and about the others. Although I don't like to quote internet and Wikipedia, I think I found a somewhat objective definition of human dignity. It says like treating yourself and others with respect. In that you see that there's equality in there. Now, I'm grateful that Evelyn invited me to share my personal account of siege of Sarajevo and life in Sarajevo before, during and after the war, because you see that personal account has a lot to do with human dignity and humiliation from my personal perspective. Later on I did some research to see how that works on the so-called objective level, but for the moment I will provide you with an short account of my personal experience. So as Evelyn nicely said in the introduction, living in Sarajevo from 1974 when I was born to 1991 when the war broke out was life for an ordinary young person that was just worryless, if I could put it that way. At that time, the state in which we lived lived with a certain standards that could not be called quite the third country. So we were not actually aware of the real troubles, but people might be aware for two reasons. First, we were very young. Very young people are full of adrenaline, full of their worries, which aren't really true worries when you compare them to third countries and the so-called third countries. I don't like this name, but countries that are really struggling, trying to get their society to a better living. We weren't aware of that, So growing up in Sarajevo was quite a joyous experience from my perspective and the perspective of many of my friends. And like I said, the growing was taking its own course until a certain point. Now that certain point was when we suddenly started seeing on TV that there was a turmoil in former Yugoslavia. There was certainly an indicator that something was going on, and even us, the youth, the young people, we were 16, 17, almost 18, realized that something was going on, something serious was going on. So although we were full of this positive adrenaline, as I like to say, as young people, we realized that the earth was shaking underneath our feet to some extent. And this culminated in armed conflict, or rather, in my personal account, I wouldn't even call it armed conflict, because I like to talk about things that I have experienced personally, with all due respect to other personal accounts of different perspectives of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. What I saw as a citizen and a native of Sarajevo was that one day this city was under siege. And then again, this was my personal account, with all due respect to all different subjective opinions about the situation. The biggest shock for me was when first few mortar shells fell into the city in my neighborhood, injuring a couple of people. Then the next one killed our neighbor. Then I realized that things were really getting very serious. This was 1992. And that was that big shock bomb that me and my generation probably experienced. The rest of it then turned into mere survival in the city under siege in different various ways. However, I must break this, if I can say, cliché narrative with certain other elements that I've experienced, and that is solidarity among civilians, because I was a civilian during the siege of Sarajevo here, engaged as a medical staff at the local hospital. I realized that a situation like this put people together, people under siege together. There was a lot of solidarity, a lot of help. At certain points in time, you would even forget the real situation, the siege of the city, until the moment another mortar shell falls into the city, massacres several people, or if somebody is killed by a sniper fire or anti-aircraft weapons, etc., etc. So this was a constant reminder of the situation in which we lived, and a constant escape from the situation. In that sense, I must admit that I truly admire the artists of Sarajevo, who even the siege, even during the siege, try to give some hope to people. And I think it really worked, because they would organize various artistic conventions in the basements where it was slightly safer, at different hidden places. At one point in time, people were even walking in the city, as dangerous as it might be. So
why was it dangerous? You would have to explain that.
Yes, okay. It was dangerous because the city was under siege, and first of all, the very fact that the city was under siege, it didn't feel safe. Then if you try to walk in the city, especially at the beginning in '92, you would actually be exposed to potential mortar shelling of the city or sniper fire. So the way we Sarajevans used to walk was the zigzag, run zigzag, and at night a lot of Sarajevans would put certain barricades between two buildings, like put cars one on top of another, so they can run across the streets in order to avoid being shot by sniper or killed by mortar shell. More or less, I wouldn't go into much of the details.
Like your water, you carrying water from...
Yes, certainly. Area where I used to live, we didn't have, we often had cuts of water and electricity, so people had to improvise. So I would have to walk about, let's say, 3 or 4 kilometers, along with all other people from my neighborhood, to get water downtown, in the opposite part of the city. And then it was a challenge to carry these cans of water and get back to your home, or get back to hospital where I was working at that time. So in a way, this was a real struggle. But like I said, it was a mixed feeling for me of struggle, plus, you know, that hope that I would get by being together with people. So you were sharing.
And your father was, you told me this story with your father and how he disappeared from the basement. You always were in the basement in security.
Exactly. At the beginning we were at the basement, and my father would, one day, we were staying there for several days during the bombing, during the shelling of the city. And we really didn't know what was happening, because that was really, really something that that shook us all, and because we didn't know what to expect from that. You could hear various news, various words. There was a little radio that we were listening, and then at one point in time, there was a complete silence about 3 or 4 early in the morning, and then my father would disappear to bring food and bread and humanitarian aid that we were receiving as from 1992. The next morning we had some power on, so we had cuts of power and water. It would be on and off all the time at the beginning. And I hear at the news that there was a massacre in one of the main roads downtown. And I knew my father was going there because his brother was living there. And I thought he was in the crowd of people who were waiting for humanitarian aid. Most of them were massacred, really, by a mortar shell. So I ran out trying to get to him, but I ran the risk of being killed myself on the way to that place. And then somehow I missed him on the road. I don't know which road he took to get to our house, to our apartment. But when he came back home, he was holding 2 ice cream cans, probably the last stocks of ice cream in the city. Given his humorous spirit and positive energy, I knew that he was going to divert from reality by making some jokes. And he would hold the ice cream, says like, "This strawberry, that's mine. I favor strawberry ice cream." So you see, even under these circumstances, you see that people, not all perhaps, but people try to divert into a better reality. And I think Sarajevans were particularly good, and I'm sure that people who go through a lot of similar situations use this mechanism spontaneously to divert from reality and energize themselves, or I could even dare to say dignify themselves, so they don't feel humiliated, although they're put under extreme strain of survival. And I'm sure that there are similar or even worse situations than Sarajevo was around the globe.
Yes, I think people don't realize how severe the situation was. I heard Jovan Divjak say that everybody lost about 15 kilos of weight. People were planting tomatoes on their balconies, but they could only harvest them at night, of course. And I noticed that even today you are hesitant to switch on the light in the house because of snipers, even so many years after.
Yes, yeah, well, it's amazing that we didn't notice that when after the war, when I moved to another city, we would still, me and my brother would still run across the roads until our friend noticed that and says like, "Why are you running across the road?" We just didn't notice that, these are some habits that you develop by living here. But of course, like I said, people would gather even during the war, socialize. There was a lot of socializing because people did not know what was going to happen. So there was a lot of socializing between various groups, socializing and solidarity at the same time, So this is something that I believe is a mechanism. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure that there are situations in the world where people can't even afford that because the situation is very, very dangerous, like it is right now. In Syria, in the Middle East, and in parts of Africa and different parts of the world. All I can say is that one feels sorry that you cannot provide a little strength, a little ray of dignity to those people who are surviving, civilians who are surviving different and very difficult moments at this time as we are speaking now. This is why I use the story of Sarajevo to say that humans, ordinary humans, can do a lot more through this concept of continuous solidarity, never giving up solidarity at various levels, starting from interpersonal communication all the way up to some real help, material, existential help, financial help, or whatever help you can provide to the needy, to those in need. I believe that we as humankind really have not explored that continuous, unbroken mutual solidarity at the global level. And I believe with certain level of organization and certain a level of logistics, if I may say, and good leaderships, humans can certainly do a lot more for one another. In that respect, you know, we can talk about war zones, which is really difficult. Sometimes you have war zones where you can do very little. In Sarajevo, we were under the war zone, but still, compared to situation in Syria, I guess today, we had perhaps a little bit more space. We were under the siege, but we still have space within the city where we could do something for one another. At least you could do something during the time when the city was not shelled, when the city was not under the sniper fire, or where you were in the safe place. You could do something for one another. I don't know if people did this intentionally or spontaneously or out of fear, but they certainly were much more solidarity driven, socializing, and much more caring and considerate than they are now. And this is what amazed me. I thought that we would have this continuum of mutual care at all levels, from everyday interpersonal level all the way up to institutional care, where institutions care a lot about their citizens. I'm afraid to say this, and I don't want to sound utterly pessimistic, but I'm afraid to say that in my hometown, I think we have, to significant extent, we have neglected or forgotten that we can provide a lot more care at the everyday level, at any level, interpersonal, one-to-one, at the level of relationship between institutions and citizens, and within and among citizens themselves. I see a lot more of impatience today. Some may argue that this could be a consequence of war. I don't know, it may, and there was a number of researches done in this area. Some may argue that this is not a consequence of war because a vast majority, I'd say, of population in Sarajevo, or maybe not even vast majority, but maybe half of the population, did not experience the siege of Sarajevo, the contemporary citizens of Sarajevo. But that doesn't matter, really. We're all equal anyhow. What I'm arguing is that I think sometimes, although we went through the turmoil of survival, it is good to think of the positive things that happened there. And that is precisely this human solidarity, a mutual dignification, if I can say this way. I know this is a constructed word, but what I'm trying to say is that although people were under siege, they did not feel humiliated. On the contrary, they felt they were putting up a resistance against some people who were armed, besieged the city, shelled the city, destroyed some of its buildings. And civilians also put up a resistance against certain people within the city who might have been carrying arms and weapons, who did not besiege the city. They were within the city. They were part of the, perhaps some self-proclaimed defenders of the city, if I can call it that way. So civilians had to put up with that too. You know, I mean, you can't argue that you should view any conflict in terms of black and white, obviously. So within the city, with a couple of 100,000 of people, obviously you don't have a Puritan society. There must be people who are, let's say, criminally oriented, and so and so. So obviously there were people like that even during the siege in the city. So civilians have to protect themselves, guard themselves against those people too. So there was a lot of challenges indeed, but I guess all of these challenges were made easier, were resolved in an easier way, precisely because even during the siege, I had a sense of belonging, belonging to civilians, belonging to my friends, belonging to my family, belonging to a big family that is putting up a resistance. I'm talking about civilians of Sarajevo. I'm constantly talking about civilians. And civilians, in my view, have been somehow neglected in all this story. Once I spoke with my friend, and he actually told me something that I keep repeating. He says, like, we could have made a brand out of this resistance that we have put as civilians, because we had a struggle and fight within ourselves to stay sane, to stay strong. Plus we had a struggle technically to survive in a besieged city that was constantly under bomb shells, not constantly, but most of the time under the bomb shells, under the sniper fire, and under the threats from within the city. So in a way, anytime I talk about the siege of Sarajevo, I'd like my story, my personal account, to be a homage to resistance of decency-minded civilians, human dignity-minded civilians, who even during the siege of Sarajevo made sure that they don't look differently at a neighbor who's of different ethnicity or different religious background. This was my experience in my neighborhood, from what I could see. And not for a moment did I think that anybody would think like that, although we had situations in the city where unfortunately people of different ethnicities died actually from within, from certain individuals. There was a lot of things that need to be cleared out. How did that happen? Why did that happen? But in general, my personal account was that I personally did not see that the siege of Sarajevo caused discrimination or maltreatment of those who were different than majority of the citizens of Sarajevo.
Could you explain? Many people might not know which groups were living.
Okay. Well, I know this is a bit of a cliche story now, but basically, people who besieged Sarajevo belong to certain ethnicity. Let's say in this case we can say Serb ethnicity. But then again, you had people of Serb ethnicity who were against that siege of Sarajevo. Some of them were even in Sarajevo. You had people who raised their voice that were of Serb ethnicity outside of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a common sense. You cannot have one nation or one people where you have every individual thinking in the same way. This is nonsense. And majority of people who were under the siege in Sarajevo were Bosniaks.
What does that mean? Because I didn't know.
Yeah, Bosniak today means person of Muslim background, not necessarily practicing Muslim, but person of Muslim background.
Perhaps you can say that they changed religious affiliation during history.
Yes, well, you know what? I must say that I'm very cautious with history, because I feel most comfortable when I talk about things that I witnessed personally myself. And I could never honestly understand how people get really heated about history when they were not there. They didn't see it. That's beyond rationale for me. But conventional history holds that you have three ethnicities here, the so-called ethnicity, so you can call them three people, or whichever you like, you know. You have Serbs, Croats, and Muslims who are called Bosniaks today. And conventionally, this is what we hold today, like three ethnicities, yes.
But they are not necessarily ethnicities.
But they are not necessarily ethnicities. Some view them as one people with three religions. Some others say like they are three different people. So it depends how you want to view it. It depends how you want to interpret. I believe that everybody has a right to decide what they want to be and how they want to be. They don't need to ask somebody if they can be, I don't know, Serb, Bosnia, Croat, English, British, Scottish, or whatever. You know, I mean, it's a common sense for me. Like you don't need to get the approval for your identity. You choose your identity, so it's your free will. In any case, I believe that there was a lot of decency-minded people during the war here who wanted to make sure that there is certain level of equality between different nations here, people who were primarily humanity oriented, not ethnicity oriented, but humanity oriented. And these people are people that I truly admire. I believe they were authentic. I believe I know many of them. Some of them died, unfortunately. This was something that kept me alive, gave me strength, because I personally come from different ethnic backgrounds, and I personally don't have the ethnic background as the majority here, and that never bothered me. But I thought that it's a common sense if we give a priority to what's common to us, that human identity, rather than ethnic identity. Certainly that doesn't undermine ethnic identities, but imagine what can happen if we prioritize what's in common, what we have in common. Imagine if we give a little more room to universal values that we share. And as misused as this word may be, peace is one of these prerequisites for our further progress of humankind. And by that I don't just mean lack of armed conflict. No, I mean that there is no conflict at any level between humans. And it is possible. You practice it every day. You need to practice it. Just you practice your when you practice your muscles, you go to the gym. Being peaceful takes time and takes practice and can be learned. Some people have it by nature, some people learn it. And I've seen people like that during the siege, indeed. I've seen people during the siege who were peace-minded, human dignity and human rights oriented. You know, I've seen them in their acts, I've seen them gathering people together, I've seen them that they never let me suspect that they would look somebody with a different eyes because they're different. I've seen people during the siege, so even though they might be outraged, furious because they were under the siege, they never allowed the situation to turn them against different ethnicities within the city. And this is what I admire. You know, I wish these people had more saying. I wish these people get better organized. I wish these people spread this view further. You know, in a nutshell, it is possible. It is possible to prevent yourself from becoming contaminated with hatred, intolerance, xenophobia, dominance. You know, people are prone to dominance, to dominate the other. It is possible to prevent this. I believe the recipe, if I can say this way, simplifying the whole human relationships, if I need to simplify it, I'd say the recipe is that you practice, exercise, and try to remain faithful to your human dignity-oriented beliefs.
And you would say here your parents would not use the word dignity, they would use humanness. Yes, exactly. When my parents had a pleasure of meeting Evelin, before that I told my parents that, you know, Evelin is the founder of Human Dignity and Humiliation Studies Network, and I've constantly used the word dignity. And they said, like, you see, different people have a different understanding of the word dignity. With Evelin, we'd rather use word humane and humanist rather than dignity. So that tells me that sometimes, like most of the time, people may have different understanding of the word dignity. What some would understand by word dignity is probably something that Evelin would refer to as dignitary. You know, there might be a little difference, confusion caused by this. But in essence, human dignity, as understood by Evelin and Human DHS, and as understood by me, is that humanistic definition of dignity, rather than horizontal, yes, where you have hierarchy. Vertical.
Yes, vertical, yes, exactly. Human dignity, that's Human DHS, Human Dignity and Humiliation Studies Network, nurtures, is that version of human dignity which says treat yourself and other with maximum respect, being equal in that process. So that's this humanistic, or some would say romantic notion, romantic definition.
And why is it not romantic to you?
You say, when people say romantic here, they usually may mean some
You
of
meet this criticism a lot here. Huh?
Yes, you would think that it's rather romanticism concept that derives from romanticism, or idealistically humanistic.
Poor.
Yeah, usually people would sometimes say like, oh, poor, you know, he's so good, she's so good, you know. There is this notion, perhaps not only in this region, but all over the world. I've come across that when we talk about certain concepts of humanities and humaneness, usually people associate that with idealism, with romanticism, rather than something that's realistic. But then you say, I have personal account of siege of Sarajevo, where I have seen people that have exposed their life at risk and trying to help the other person. I've seen a lot of that. I have taken part in that. I have some good friends that have really risked their lives trying to save the injured and massacred people. We also have different stories in Bosnia and Herzegovina where people of one ethnicity or nationality risk their lives to save a person of different nationality who might have been subject to imprisonment, torture, being taken away. Of course, you know, it is natural. It's not just vague romanticism that you have people who are caring more than others, and who are caring for others much longer than we usually can do. So, you know, I think we can learn from these people. At least we can give ourselves and the others chance to see how we can alter our reality by practicing, by walking the talk, as our dear Linda would say, by applying equal respect among people, by applying relationships, by applying communication styles which respect the other person and dignify the other person. Even in situations where we end up with the other side, which may not be kind, which may not be caring and considerate, you know, it's important to remain consistent as much as you can. It is challenging because we are survived these days with fast dynamics of living imposed by modern trends. You know, we live very fast today. We don't have time. We're busy. We're nervous. But we can always stop for a moment and think and rethink how we can improve our lives by mutual understanding. You know, and this is where I see human dignity comes in. You know, this is what makes you dignified as a human being, like the concept of understanding and the concept of mutual understanding. So this is how I would define really the whole concept, whole notion of human dignity. And like I said, if you cannot apply it at the global level, you can always apply it in your everyday life. Depending on kind of personality you are, you can always you can take a look at it as a project. You know, I have a friend that I spoke about this. He says like, that would be an interesting project to see how really in reality, in real life, I can contaminate, he says, the other person with goodwill. And that indeed is something that's quite challenging, quite tempting to me personally as a thought. How you can make the other person more cooperative for the common good, for mutual good. You know, and that is something that certainly can be, I believe personally, can be improved. Again, going back to the siege of Sarajevo, I would say that this was a very bitter, dangerous experience, but it also had good sides. I've seen humans at their best. I've seen humans being maximally human and humane. I've seen humans that risk their lives to help the others. I've seen a lot of solidarity between people. Now, all of that certainly disappeared after the war. Maybe probably that's human nature, that once the danger disappears, people go back to their everyday lives and they have less time, quotation mark, less time to be caring and warm and understanding to another human being, you know. Of course, there are some people who see pure romanticism in all this, like I said. Okay, and I understand that. We're not all the same. People come in different size and shape. There are people who are technically minded, technically oriented. They would think of all this that we are talking about as pure romanticism or a vague philosophy. But for us who have experienced the impact of true mutual care among people, to us this is something that gives us strength, gives us motivation. And we all know that for life to continue to run, for life to function, motivation is one of the key factors. Some people will find it in human dignity. Some people will find it in earning a lot of money. Some people will find it in being famous or popular. And that's human nature, I guess, in a nutshell. But at least for us who truly believe that we can all have better lives if we all try a little bit more in terms of being more tolerant and being more caring to one another at every level. Doesn't matter what level it is. I truly believe that the quality of human life can be, even within this domain, can be improved. Even within the domain of human relationships, everyday human relationships, I believe the quality of human life can be significantly improved. And I guess my quest would be, with as much as my free time would allow me, to experiment and explore to what extent can ordinary little people improve their lives by changing the way they live, by stopping for a moment, by seeing if they can be more caring to one another in everyday context. Meeting at street, meeting in the traffic where usually people are very nervous, at schools, at homes, at hospitals. You know, what makes life easier, another person tells me the other day, is when they were trying to get some documents for their sick child, some people offered their help to complete the paperwork voluntarily for them, because this person was under too much stress because her child was sick. He needed a treatment that she could not provide in this country, so she needed to go abroad. And I've seen people who have volunteered, and I have helped a little, as much as I could, with certain documentation. And I've seen that we can do this much. Always. We can always do one step further in dignifying one another. You know, so that we help the other person doesn't feel humiliated. Help the other person doesn't feel that this person is down. Bosses or heads of departments can do this, indeed, by thinking on how they pass the message onto their subordinates. And remember, it is not in vain that these days, or actually for the past couple of decades, people in many different developed countries have realized that the old system of authoritarian hierarchy does not seem to work. It demotivates people. So they realize they have to come down, that being bossy does not lead anywhere. So they realize they have to come here. And there's this famous picture that most of us have seen, the difference between boss and a leader. You know, the boss is sitting here and the workers are pulling him in his chair. He's just sitting in a chair. There's another picture that shows leader pulling a stone together with his workers. So I guess we need to lean more towards this true true equality, true mutuality, rather than fictitious mutuality or declarative mutuality. Once we get there, I'm absolutely certain that the quality of human lives can improve significantly. Again, at any level. We cannot all work at the global level. Ordinary people cannot do much at this stage, unfortunately, to prevent the killing of so many innocent civilians around the globe. Unfortunately, our hands are tied, and that makes you a little stressed because you can just watch how people suffer and do nothing. But at least we can alleviate some of that stress by improving the quality of our relationships in everyday life where we live. And again, to do that, I guess the recipe is that we don't get contaminated ourselves by intolerance, by authoritarian thinking, and by dominator thinking. And this in itself is good for us, so we can carry on. Again, this would be more or less my message from the siege of Sarajevo, you know. And I wish that we retrieve in this city, a little bit of more mutual care. And when I say we, I mean ordinary people. Ordinary people. And all of us can work and do something in that respect. So we'll see. That's a quest. That's a quest. That's a project that you don't write down in a piece of paper and have a deadline. This is a project that I and a lot of people that think like me have every day when we have an encounter with another human being. We have to think thoroughly how our words are going to impact the other person. And we can think how our words can motivate the other person to motivate other people. And you can only motivate people if you respect them. You can only motivate people if you make them feel that they're worthy. And this brings us back to that little picture of leader pulling the rope together with his or her friends rather than workers, sharing the burden. This I've seen in real life was possible in little groups, but it certainly can be multiplied. And I guess at this point I will really have to wrap it up here, because I've realized that I've repeated one and the same thing so many times. And I'd like to thank Evelin really for this opportunity to share my experience and my hope that we can and most likely will reach the point where we change our culture, that we have created a culture of much more mutuality, much more mutual understanding, where everybody will feel that they're worthy. You know, and I'm thinking that that we're already making these steps. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Human DHS. And there's one little message that I would like to share with fellow ordinary people, as they call us, you know, but people who really believe in human dignity and equality among people. And I warn you, there's not just few of us, there's many of us out there. I think it is important that we don't let politics contaminate our beliefs. And our beliefs is that we humans have common values, core values. We have something in common, you know. Mutuality, mutual helping in need is something that we have in common. Mutual respect is something in common. At the end, I'm going to use this word that has been misused so many times and has been devalued, and that's peace. But right now I cannot think of any other word, really. That's a first prerequisite that we function. And you cannot have it if you allow yourself to contaminate essential human values with politics or with personal interest. And we all know this. I mean, I'm not saying something that's new, of course. This has been around since the dawn of humanity. All I'm trying to say is that I have seen people who did not allow to be contaminated by politics. They always put human values first, human in the first place. Once you achieve that, the next steps are easier. Human relationships are easier. If you don't allow yourself to be contaminated by different things like politics, like when I say politics, I mean exclusivistic politics, politics that exclude certain groups, politics that don't promote common good. This is what I mean by politics. Certainly you should uphold politics that promote common good, of course, if they're authentic. But if you don't allow yourself to be contaminated by anything that could destroy this vision, this belief of equal dignity, people being equal in dignity, then you've made a significant step forward. Again, that means working hard to remain faithful to your beliefs, and then perhaps working hard to try to how shall I put it? I don't want to use the word contaminate, but try to influence other people, to explore the possibility of mutual understanding, to explore the possibility of common good. I think these two steps are important. So if we don't allow ourselves to be contaminated by unjust politics, we have made a significant step forward. And I constantly use the word we. I mean people who truly believe in human dignity, and that people should be equal in human dignity. People who have this belief certainly should remain faithful and work hard to not to contaminate themselves with things that could destroy this belief, or hijack, as Evelin nicely puts it, or hijacked by vested interests and different interests that are not really truly aimed at common good in humanity. Whew.